Welcome back to Trans Heartbeat. My name is Michelle Matlock, and I encourage the use of all pronouns. Today's episode is something special. I had the absolute honor of sitting down with Jude Patton, a true trailblazer, healer, and living archive of trans history. We're talking about what it meant to transition in the early 1970s, before there was language, before there was roadmap, and what it means to carry that wisdom forward today. This one right here is legacy. It's truth. It's connection across generations. Let's get into it. This is Trans Heartbeat. Well, Mr. Jude Patton, welcome to Trans Heartbeat. Just to start off, if you will state your name, pronouns, where you're coming from, what you're doing.
Okay. My name's Jude Patton, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And I am in Yuba City, California now, although I haven't always lived here. I grew up in Illinois. So it was a great my biggest transition in life. It seems like there were two. One was getting to move to California, and the other was the obvious one.
Right. Your entire life is absolutely legendary, historical, significant, important. And so I'm just happy to talk to you a little bit about that today. And one thing that I noticed, I think I learned that you were born in St. Louis, Missouri. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
So was I. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, too. I didn't stay there that long. My parents moved here to the West Coast when I was really young, but I still have family there, and that's where my parents grew up. And so, I've visited many times. So
my last visit there was probably at least 5 or 6 years ago. I was meeting with Jess Dugan, the photographer who does a lot of work with the whole community, really, the LGBTQ community, but focusing on the trans community as well.
So did he take some photos of you?
He did, but it was for a project he did several years ago, almost 10 years ago now. And what it was, he photographed a bunch of trans people over the age of 50. And his wife is a college professor there in St. Louis and does work about trans history as well. So that was a good combination for them to get together and do this project.
Nice. Well, I wanted for our audience who may not know your history, and your just being I think one of the original human beings that went through a transition in 1971. Can you tell us a little bit about going through a medical transition and during that time when there was almost no roadmap, no language, very little community visibility? Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, it take longer than a little bit. I'll try to keep it. Try to keep it with a shorter framework, but you're right. There was almost nothing available to me in terms of knowledge that was out there. And of course, the internet didn't exist as it is today, if at all, if at all. Um, and the only hint that I knew about this at all was Christine Jorgensen's story in 1952, at which time I was 12 years old. I read the newspaper headlines that said XGI becomes blonde bombshell. And I was fascinated with the whole idea of her story. And I thought, gee, I wonder if they do it for people like me, the opposite way around. But in my child's mind, I thought I'd have to go to Denmark and it might cost over $100,000. And how would I ever do it? And so, anyway, that was all I heard for many years after. I started looking for information from that time on. I was lucky to come across some reading materials that gave me more information from a book publisher called Little Blue Book. And they published things about all kinds of subjects, including homosexuality, including what we call intersex now, but had a different name then.
Right.
And I kept looking for information. And when I moved to California, I love drag shows. So I was exposed to a lot of people who were both drag queens and identified in some ways, you know, opposite of their birth sex. But I never met a guy. I never met a trans man. And
Mm.
then one day, my employer hired another dog groomer. I was working as a dog groomer, and he was a trans man. Ah, he was one of the first trans men to I want to not call it graduate, but who was involved with Johns Hopkins programs on the East Coast. In
Right.
1965, he had gone through hormonal treatment, had his top surgery. This was 1969 when I met him. He told me about himself. He gave me a book to read, which I didn't know existed, Dr. Harry Benjamin's book on transsexuality. I looked at that book, flipped through it, and I thought, oh my God, this is what it is. This is who I am.
Wow.
And fortunately, he gave me the name of his endocrinologist and his psychiatrist. I was able to get appointments with both the next week, and they at that time considered me what a classic case. They had no question about my need for medical intervention and started hormones right away in 1970. I actually 1970 started hormones, and then had surgery over a period of a year, four different surgeries at Stanford University. I think I was the third person at Stanford who was female to male. And I already had an interest in helping other people. I was always out and open about who I am. I had a crew cut when I was 14, and which wasn't the style for girls at the time,
Right.
and was always dressing as masculinely as I could. There were dress codes at school I was forced to follow, but otherwise, after high school, I never did that again.
Right.
Um,
With the Johns Hopkins and Stanford, from what I read, that they're just both sort of groundbreaking and gate kept also a little
yes,
bit.
a
And
very much
so
gatekept.
I just
That's
wonder if you could share a little bit more about that. Like, how did you navigate that access?
the gatekeeping. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And how are those, how, I mean, as you reflect on even that, how do those, how do you reflect on those systems now, knowing what we know about, autonomy, dignity, and trans
Sure.
self-determination?
Well, I have a couple of remarks from my end of it and my experience. I'll do that, and then I'll talk about what I felt then about it and how I feel now about it.
Fantastic.
The gatekeeping part. Um, I was very, very, very lucky with everyone that I had contact with, even the doctor who was my hormone doctor, Dr. Gerald Lev in Los Angeles, was just a sweetheart, a wonderful person. And I only had one visit with the psychiatrist they sent me to at the time. The gatekeeping came, yes, you're right. At Stanford had a whole process of gatekeeping, and I just passed right through that because of my
Mm,
presentation and how I was had been living my life before. They didn't stop me, they didn't hold me back. I was able to do part of the paperwork without traveling to Stanford, and they had a 22-page, by the way, intake intake evaluation on paper. I met with, I drove up there and I met with their psychiatrist, their psychologist, and a couple of other people, an attorney, and so forth, to talk about, don't sue me. They said, don't sue me. We're agreeing not to sue us if you don't like the surgery. It was
right.
considered experimental. So I had none of that gatekeeping. I was
Okay.
literally allowed to go through as quickly as I could. Uh, and and yet people all around me, including two close friends, including the fellow that let me know, the dog groomer guy, who was seeking his own bottom surgery. I got in there and got through before anybody that I met
Wow.
met who were other trans people at that same time. And I knew I wanted to help people by that time. And so I asked my surgeon, Dr. Donald Laub, I said there was a conference coming up there at Stanford about trans issues and surgery for doctors. And I asked him, oh, gee, I would really like to go to that, but I don't know. Do you think it would be possible? He says, oh, you can come as my guest. And
Wow.
he really mentored me in the first few years in that regard. By 1979, some years later, I was at a conference, another conference, because they kept holding them every 2 years, um, all over the world. At another one of those conferences in 1979, they decided they wanted to incorporate as the Harry Benjamin Gender Dysphoria Association, which is now WPATH. And they wrote up two standards of care, 2 pages was all the standards of care were at the time. Now they're over 150 pages, right? But at the
Right.
time it's 2 pages written by one person. And they decided at that meeting in 1979 they wanted to include a consumer advocate with their board of directors and chose me to do that. Not
Uh,
without a whole bunch of comment, by the way. They had a vote on it, and the vote was tied for and against. And Dr. Loud was the president of the association by then, and he voted yes, which got me that position. I did that for 6 years. Later, I served on their board of directors again around 1999 to 2001, um, and so on and so forth. And I've been a part of that organization ever since. My comment about the gatekeeping part is this: they had no intention of trying to keep people out. It was for protection, literally for protection of individuals from unscrupulous surgeons. There was an
right.
infamous doctor at the time, Dr. John Brown, who was, and I mean, infamous. He had already been arrested several times, lost his license in 4 states, was then practicing out of Mexico, and was really harming a lot of people. Did his surgeries sometimes were okay, but many times were not okay. And
Okay.
so the standards of care were set up and pretty rigid at first. They obviously keep changing, and the last change was a couple of years ago. And the only thing that I think is left out that should be, and this is my big campaign and has been for the last 20 years, is nowhere in the standards of care does it have a separate section that addresses the health care of older trans people
Mm.
and their end of life concerns. And boy, oh boy, I'm old, so it impacts me directly. And for all of us who are getting older, and we all are every day, stop and think about what would happen if you were even at any age in a hospital setting, and all of the intimate body care that's needed there. And the same thing if you were in a long term care facility as you age, how would you be treated? And so there's a lot of fears around that. And even how are your remains treated, your post death treatment? Is somebody going to put your dead name on your tombstone?
Right.
Are they going to bury you in the clothing you abhor that you never wanted to wear? Or are they going to, all this kind of stuff?
Right. Yeah. Definitely. My goodness. Whew, there's so much there. I feel like is the are you writing a book? Are they making a movie? What's going on
Okay,
here?
well, I'm glad you asked that because it's something I would also like to talk about. Yes, I am writing a book. I'm in
Oh,
the process of writing my own memoirs, but that's an ongoing thing that I rarely touch. I know I need to get it done before. can't. But I have a friend who has five small publishing companies. She lives in Victoria, British Columbia. She's a retired anthropologist from the University of Victoria, and her name is Margot Wilson. Margot's publishing company, the main one, is called Transgender Publishing, all one word, Transgender Publishing .ca. And I would
Okay.
invite anyone who's watching this, you too,
Yes.
to go to that website. She has tons of books that all either written by or they're for or about trans people and non-binary people. I've written some stories and edited two books called Transcestors.
Oh, yeah, that leads me into the next question. Like, you've been deeply committed to documenting trans lives and lifting up trans elders through projects like
Mhm.
Transcestors. So, why is it important? And this is for our younger generation, this is really, really important. Why is it so important that we remember? And what do you worry might be lost if we don't actively preserve our stories?
Boy, I never thought about it that way, but I've always thought that history was important for any cause and the purpose of preserving, but especially of our history. And we have more history about people who existed centuries ago than we do about people who existed in the last century. So we're trying to preserve those. And one of the largest collection that I'm aware of is at the University of Victoria. Uh, and it has been. A lot of the smaller collections have now given over their collection to the UVic. And then there are several other collections around the United States and around the world that are accessible too. You just have to know where to look. I
Right.
start with something simple like transgender history and go from there. Um, the UVic website is another thing that people should get into with the archives. That if they're a history buff, they also have videos of all of their most of the speakers that they've had at UVic, and most of the conferences have been recorded as well. And you can go online and watch all these speakers, wonderful materials. And the reason I think it should be preserved is the obvious. We Everybody thinks the current generation believes that they hold all the information, right? And they don't look at their past. They have no clue as to who did what way back when.
Right.
And I can tell you when I got started, other than this person I told you about that came to work where I did, who was not interested he was not open, never did open up about himself, never was interested in preserving history or anything else. I had two other people that I made contact with in those early 70s. One was Rupert Raj, RAJ. Rupert is from Canada. He was an early pioneer there and has written a great deal and involved in a great deal there. And another one was a trans man who wrote a book in 1977. Um, and he was from New York City. So the three of us maintained a snail mail correspondence for many years before the internet became available. I still think history is valuable to 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 gather. I think that networking is a wonderful way like this, you know, to be able to speak with others who are doing similar work. Right now, my devotion again is to the aging people
Right.
mostly. It's not, I see people of all ages as a therapist, but I'm still trying to ignite the flame about spending more time for people to care about people in my age group. Um,
it's
And
important. It's absolutely
yeah,
important. I'm glad to hear you saying that, and it just makes me more curious about um, what we all can do to support that. And you mentioned, you didn't just live. You
hmm
became a healer and a therapist, like you said, and someone who has held space for others for decades. Um, and can you tell us a little bit about what called you into that work, and what have trans people taught you across generations about healing, resilience, about care?
what it's interesting because I never, ever, ever thought I'd be doing would do what I did, ended up doing. My childhood dream was to become a veterinarian,
Ah,
and that's thus the dog grooming history. And that was really my biggest dream. And I had won a full ride scholarship when I was in high school to go to college. However, at the time, the dress codes would not permit women on campus in slacks or pants of any kind. So I just gave up my scholarship and did not go, did not start college till I was 34.
okay.
And so I always try to encourage people who are a little behind, don't let that stop you. Anyway,
Right.
so when I got to college, that was still my ambition to become a veterinarian, and I started in as a biology major. I found out in my junior year that it was unlikely that I would get into veterinary school, even though they're not supposed to discriminate because of age. By the time I would have been through with my bachelor's program, I would have been 38 years old, and my faculty advisor had worked at Berkeley and at UC Davis, where UC Davis is where the vet program is. And he said, "You just are not going to get in. And it's going to be because how old you are. You better
Mm,
think about changing your major." And I'd always taken a lot of courses in psychology, sociology, and so on, and I liked them. So I switched my major to something at UC Irvine called social ecology. And it's a combination of
mm,
environmental issues and law and public policy and planning. And I did get that bachelor's. And during that time, I started thinking, well, I I still want to go on for further education. So I chose psychology. And and I can say that perhaps some of my interest in that was because of my experience growing up. My adoptive mother was off and on very depressed.
mm,
And at the time I was 25 or so, she was actually hospitalized for a year in a psychiatric institution
mm.
because of her depression. Um, and so there are things like that that made me more interested in that and then having become a marriage and family therapist, I found out, gee whiz, I have a lot of clients who do well with therapy, but they could do even better with medication. And so I went back to school and became a physician assistant in family practice because that's the main training we all get in family practice. And then I specialized in psychiatry as a PA, and I've been doing that. So I've always had a private practice as a therapist, and then my income is better as a PA, working for, in clinics or hospitals or things like that.
Right.
And it's just been one educational event after the other. I can tell you I'm a lifelong learner. Uh, uh, I never not watched something that I can online. There are so many things that are available to all of us educational wise. I have so many things this week that that are free education for me.
Right. Right. No,
And
I'm so glad that you're saying that, because there is so much out there that we that we don't know about. Like I mean, you're actually educating me and our listeners and our watchers so much about things that we can dig into and find that maybe we didn't know about. So I really appreciate you sharing and educating us on this. You know, on ways that we could just find out more about, what has happened in the past, what's going on right now. Um, you know.
Yeah, in the past, there again, at the time, Stanford, just to go back a little bit in the history part of it, at the time, Stanford and Johns Hopkins were involved. Within the next 2 or 3 years, there were 22 different hospital affiliated gender programs that developed. So
Oh,
in the early 70s, there's this outburst of institutional settings where you could get, as a sort of, again, research guinea pig, you could get surgeries done. And then the John and then John Money at Johns Hopkins, the program was shut down due to some things that he did that were not okay, and they started closing all those programs.
oh wow.
And at that time, there were very few other doctors in private practice that were trained to do this kind of work. And so there was this, you know, waiting period of sorts for clients, for us, people like me who might want surgery or even revisions to surgery. There was no, very little, few places to go. And then finally, people within the medical community began training each other, traveling across the world to, hone in on their skills. And we finally have all, probably hundreds at this point, at least a couple of hundred of surgeons throughout the universe who are doing this surgery. And it becomes like a big choice. Where do we go? The big cities are still the target for most to go to.
Right. And is there, I mean, it sounds like from the begin well, this beginning
Mm,
that you're talking about, there were sort of this tinge of unethical
mm,
practices that
mm.
were happening. Is that still remain today? I mean, is it something to still watch out for and
Well,
or is
yeah, I hear you. I hear the question. I'm sure there are people. What the problem becomes for all of us is the cost, the individual cost, monetary
right,
uh, cost of these types of surgery. And if you have a sort of Cadillac model of for a trans men, I call it the Cadillac model. You may be charged in total around $150,000 or more, and take over 4 to 5 years to get everything completed during that time.
right,
Mm, uh, we, in our desperation to have this surgery, people will tolerate anything
right,
and might get themselves into trouble for choosing a surgeon that offers lower cost and yet does not have the skills to do it. So there are people out there, none that I've heard of, that are quite as bad as John Brown was.
right,
Um, and there are still people pumping silicone into their bodies.
right,
And there are still people trying different surgeries that might be more harmful than others. But it's not to the extent of what this one man did way back when. Um, we do have, I'm in Middle California, and in the Bay Area, we have wonderful physicians, and so
right.
also in San Diego and in Los Angeles. So in California, we have a wonderful group groups of people who are doing great surgery.
Right. I think y'all are pretty known
Yeah,
across the
and,
nation for it.
and in the East Coast, and it's the middle of the country, the middle states, that Midwest kind of area that has fewer. There are some, of course, but
Right.
far fewer than the coastal cities have.
Right. Well, man, I could spend forever speaking to you and just learning from you, but I don't want to keep you. You have a very busy day. So I just have one more question for you as you've witnessed over 50 years of trans history, moments of invisibility, backlash, growth, and possibility. So when you look at trans people today, especially young folks, what gives you hope? And what wisdom or guidance do you most want to
Mm.
pass forward?
Well, it does give me hope because there are people like you who are much younger than I, and so many people are interested in engaging in conversation. That's the first part. Engage, 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 network, network, network. But we, there is a, you know, with the knowledge that's accumulated so far, that's why I think history is important. The knowledge that we're building on, the standing on somebody else's shoulders. With, you mentioned earlier when you talked about there wasn't, I didn't have any shoulders to stand on, literally.
Right.
I had a little bit of information, but there are lots of shoulders. There are lots of people like me who are older and I won't say wiser in any amount, but have more experience, have had more time to learn about this. And I look at a mentoring situation as being ideal, where conversations between youth and elders are so important with this, and that we
Mm,
share that. Um, had I not made it my business to continue to educate myself, I don't think I'd be in this position to say this, but I think it's important to keep up on what's new out there, both surgically and mental health wise. I think it's important to know our history, to know that we have people who may stand out, but and what I look at is it's not the people in the middle ground who change the world, it's the people on the fringes. So don't discount ideas that seem way, way out for the moment, because they probably will be tomorrow's way of doing things, of getting through to people. I
yes.
I would encourage any person at any age, not just youth, but of any age, to get involved to the extent that they feel safe doing. And this is my personal opinion. It's just absolutely personal. If you could be out safely, I think in my mind, psychologically, that is the best way to live your life. I know some people feel they can never do that because they feel they would not be safe, or the loss is too great. And um I honor that decision as well. But I found, just as a therapist, my clients who are living and simply being themselves in the world and not hiding who they are doing psychologically much better despite any losses
Right.
than people who are constantly looking over their shoulder wondering who's going to find out about
Right. I,
them.
I I appreciate you saying that. It's an important point to make, and for people to hear. Um,
And not, as I said, not everyone can make that choice or
that's
has the
right.
capacity to make that choice, but those of us who have, I've met such. And the other thing that I would suggest, if at all possible, barring the expense and travel distances and things like that, if at all possible, go to community conferences, go to some of these huge, huge conferences that are held either annually or every 2 years. For instance, the history part of this, University of Victoria has something called Moving Trans History Forward. It's a
Mm,
conference they hold every 2 years, and there are several hundred people that attend that. And the Philadelphia Health Conference used to be the same way. So I tell people to go online and look at, transgender conferences or whatever, and pull up, because there'll be a bunch of them. Pull up the ones that are in different big cities. And if you see anything you can possibly attend, go to it. Many of them are no longer hybrid as they were during COVID, but there are still some that are hybrid. So if you can't travel, you can watch online. Some of
Right.
them are some of them are even free. So, so
Yeah.
many of them aren't, but some of them are online or otherwise. But it's a great place to network. If you're not doing that, for instance, most big cities will have some sort of LGBTQ center, and most of those centers will have support groups or other information group for trans people as well.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
I'm involved here locally with the Gender Health Center in Sacramento, and I'm actually supervising one of their uh, therapy interns. Um, they have several interns that work with them providing therapy at low cost to community members. We'll leave this as one last thing is thank goodness about 3 years ago, US PATH decided to add a special interest group on aging. And so they asked me to lead that group. And I have a co-lead, Max Fearman, and we meet once a month, and it's all therapists and doctors who are interested in treating older people. And we've developed some educational materials for US PATH in that direction. So
Okay. Yeah. No, this is amazing. I mean, thank you so much for just being available and sharing all of your knowledge and your wisdom. There's so much to gain here. I really appreciate you taking this time. The history is so powerful, and you're so important in this story. So I really appreciate you sharing your story with us here today.
I want to thank you too, and thank you for the work that you're doing and devoted to. And if you want me to, I can put you as your uh, email address on my list. I
Oh,
have
yes,
all kinds of information that might be useful to what you're doing, or give you more
absolutely.
information, and I'd be glad to do that.
What a gift! Jude Patton reminds us that we are never starting from scratch. We are standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. Thank you, Jude, for your brilliance, your honesty, and your lifelong commitment to our community. And thank you for listening to Trans Heartbeat. Please be sure to like, follow, and share. We'll see you next time.